Hey, everybody. We are back to another episode of Public Voices by NEOGOV. And I'm Doug.
I'm Nicole.
Today, we're talking about something that's really very, very interesting in the space. We're talking about trusts, and not just public trust that's out in the community, but we're also talking about what trust looks like within organizations themselves, whether people really realize it or not. The way our employees experience leadership internally also shows up externally in how agencies serve their communities. And so today we have a very special guest who's joining us. His name is J.T. Manoushagian. He's recently retired chief of police from Lake Worth, Texas, and we are super excited to have him on board with us today. So welcome, J.T. Thanks for joining in.
Hey,
Yeah,
thank you guys
welcome.
so much for having me.
We are happy you're here. So welcome to the fun. We're going to really dive in.
Thrilled to be
Bef
here.
before we get started, I just wanna take a quick second to thank our sponsor, NEOGOV, who makes this podcast possible. So are we ready to get started?
Absolutely, let's do this.
Yes, ma'am.
This one's going to be a fun one today. So when we talk about as we kind of think about this, public trust is consistently one of the most talked about concepts in government and public safety. But we really don't ever really touch much about how it starts internally. And JT, you've been with a couple of agencies and you've even led one as a police chief. So when you look at this from like a leadership type perspective, how do you think that internal trust component really kind of measures with everything else? What's that look like to you?
Well, I think it's the foundation. I think you're dead in the water as a leader if you don't have trust. I know that we all come into organizations differently, whether you come up from internal or you come in from outside, and that puts a different spin on what you need in terms of trust. I've done it a couple of different ways. But without it, a leader who doesn't have followers can't go anywhere, can't lead the organization anywhere, and people aren't going to follow somebody that they don't trust. So I think it begins and ends literally with that. And you mentioned it's all the buzz, a lot of talk about it. Um, it is an easy word to say, and it is a really difficult thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you came to Lake Worth and you had been at Wise County before, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yep.
when you're an outside chief coming in, what did that look like to you since you were and you weren't chief at first, you were an operations commander and then you were promoted to chief?
That's right. So I knew that it was going to be an uphill battle. And I knew that if I did not get it right at first, that my chances of being successful there long term were not good. So I thought to myself, all right, how can I start to build trust with a bunch of people who do not even know who I am? And so, a couple of different things I'll share with you. I decided that a handwritten note would be the best way. And so I called up to dispatch, or maybe to an administrative assistant type person. And I said, hey, I'm the new commander coming in. I need a list of everybody's name and the position that they work in, please. And so she emailed it to me. And over a couple of weekends, I went and got some nice paper, just blank paper. And I took those names and I took my pen and I hand wrote every one of them, 8.5 by 11. This is who I am. This is what you can expect from me. This is what I expect from you. I'm really excited to meet you. And when I left, there were still some folks who had that letter pinned in their office. I never would have imagined it would have made such a difference. But, and I'm not saying that that alone was it, but it was a good start, especially as an outsider coming in. The second thing that I would offer that I think leaders often underestimate is your reputation. It would have been foolish for me to think that all of those people I was stepping in to lead didn't call around and ask their buddies, hey, can you tell me a little bit about this guy? I know you've worked with him before, or he was your supervisor or whatever. And what those people said about me mattered far more than anything else. And guess what? When I applied for that job, there was no longer anything I could do to change those words. They weren't mine. Those were the people that I'd had the privilege of leading. And had those two things, I think, not gone well, I don't I don't think I would have been successful there. But I think the letters really helped, and I think what other people said about what it was like to work for me or with me kind of opened the doors and gave me an opportunity, a fair shot, I guess, at coming in and been able to try to lead those guys and gals.
Yeah, because just because you have a title does not automatically grant that you get respect or trust, right?
That's right. Nor should it,
Right.
in my opinion.
I am curious. I love the example of the handwritten notes, just because you're acknowledging the humans in the organization and not just treating them as just a general employee. But how many notes did you write, and how much time did you invest in that?
At that time, it was probably about 50,
Yeah,
and it took a couple of weekends.
yeah,
Probably between the time I found out that I'd gotten the job and when I was going to start, because what I wanted to do was on day one put them in everybody's box because I knew there were going to be day shift and night shift, and I wasn't going to see everybody, nor was I going to be introduced to them for a while. And the last thing I wanted was for that reputation to build or be crafted by someone other than me. So
mhm,
if the first impression they had of me was what they read in their mailbox, then I felt like that was starting off on the right foot.
yeah. I think that's such a great example and really shows that return on investment that you spent a handful of hours showing who you were to those employees as well. But then, like you said, it really made an impact going forward.
And it's so simple. It
Hmm.
cost me $5 in paper and some
Right.
time, but it was very meaningful.
Hmm.
And I don't know if it's because my mom made me sit down and write thank you notes, after Christmas and birthdays and all the
Yeah.
things. But you're right. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, I wanted them to know this guy sat down and he
Hmm.
took a pen and
Yeah.
he thought about these words. He didn't type it out. He didn't text me. He wrote this for
Hmm.
me. And I hope that that conveyed he cares. And
Yeah.
I think being perceived as someone who truly cares about the people on your team is a great beginning to that foundation of trust.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what happens if trust gets eroded internally. We have things like increased burnout, lower morale, disengagement of staff. How have you addressed that at the agencies you've worked for?
I have definitely experienced ups and downs in the capital trust account. I think I've heard it described that way before, and I've always thought it was a really good analogy. But it's like an investment account or like a cup of water that you make daily deposits in. And you want it to be full because you know that there are going to come a time where you need to make a withdrawal and you don't want it to go negative. You want to make sure that there's always something in there. So I don't think a leader's job in building trust is ever done. I think you have to pursue that every day. But when you do have to make a withdrawal, you hope that there's enough in that account to keep you moving forward. But I've always found that facing it head on with humility and humanity is the best way. We tend to think as leaders that our teams expect us to be perfect. And if you're a high drive type A personality, we believe that of ourselves. And so sometimes we're even harder on ourselves than our team is. But at the end of the day, people want to know that you're human. And if a mistake has been made, either you have made one personally or it's been made by the organization, they want to see somebody own it. and they want to know what we're going to do about it. And so I think when things get quiet and there's a bunch of whispers up and down the halls and the doors are closed, it creates all of this room for people to spin and to create ideas and narratives that just don't exist. And so I think one of my favorite quotes is by General Patton, and he says, "No good decision was ever made in a swivel chair." And to me, all that means is you got to get up from behind your desk. You have to see the battlefield the way that the troops see the battlefield. And so if there's turmoil, if there's been some sort of erosion in trust, then you got to get up and you got to see it from their perspective. And once you do that, you'll be more in tune with what they're seeing, what they're feeling, and maybe even the direction that you need to go. Um, so I know the tendency is to like hang your head and feel really bad as a leader. And I'm not saying that there isn't an opportunity or a time for that in private, but when the burden is on your shoulders to lead the organization, you got to take your moment, take a deep breath, and you got to get out there and be with your folks and let them know what the plan is. How are we going to overcome this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important for leaders to demonstrate that self-accountability. And when we're able to, admit our mistakes or admit that we, made a wrong decision or an inaccurate decision, employees respect that, right? And that again builds that trust when your employees can respect and also have empathy when it's like, oh yeah, I could see why that decision was made and why that wasn't the best one at the time. But I appreciate that that leader is now coming out to say, hey, I didn't do the best I can, but here's how I'm going to fix it going forward.
I don't know if it's just policing or what, but it's so rare to hear leaders say, "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?"
Why do you think that is, JT? Why is that with us? Is it because of lack of vulnerability, or is it just? I mean,
That's
is it?
exactly what I was going to say, because it's
Yeah.
so vulnerable. You are all out there when you say those phrases. Um, but the truth is, I know that we feel vulnerable, but what everybody else sees is strength because they know how hard that is.
Mhm.
And so it creates more deposits in your trust account by doing that, because they really truly don't expect you to be perfect, but they do expect you to be honest. They do expect you to be real, and admitting failure is both of those things. It's honest and it's real. And those are the kinds of people that people want to follow.
Yeah,
Yeah. Totally.
that's a great point. And in terms of, how we look at that and how it, we talk about all these big things in terms of trust and building trust and how we approach. And your letter idea is fantastic. I don't know how many pins you went through, but I would imagine it was quite a few. But it's
Yeah,
it's
these
it's
these are my favorite.
okay. Noted. I feel like we're tagging products here. This is great. So why not, right? It's here and sponsored by. But it's the time and the effort, and I think maybe our parents are related because my parents literally sat me down after Christmas or whatever. They'll say, "Handwrite everything. You've got X amount of days to do it, or else." And
Yeah.
off, you go do it. So it's the right thing to do. But let's talk about, operationalizing trust within organizations. And I think the things I want to really key in on, and I'll base it on a kind of a quote or a concept from Simon Sinek, who I know written a lot of books and a lot of great things. Really talking about trusting teams, and teams that are called trusting teams really aren't built through just slogans or vision statements or value statements or mission statements, even as we have in police agencies, but they're built through behaviors, the things that we do in our goal towards that North Star, the things we try and do, how we communicate. Are we consistent with that communication? How are we holding people accountable? Are we fair in that work to hold people accountable? I mean, how psychologically safe do people feel? And so when you took over eventually Lake Worth, what are some of those things you operationalized? Like, how did you take those steps to create that type of trusting team within your organization or at any time before that?
Shortly after I became chief, we put together a leadership retreat because what I needed from my executive team was exponential buy-in. Like we cannot draw this out in order for us to accomplish the things that I wanted to accomplish. I can't take the cohesion of our team cannot take 6 months. It cannot take 8 months. I need it quick. So how do I do that? And I thought that getting away together was a great way to do that. So for us, we had some asset forfeiture dollars, and I put together a full program for professional development. I assigned a book that everybody had to read in advance. We scripted out different sessions that we would all have together, kind of tabletop, working through problems. But then there was also some team building. We did some axe throwing and, shot bow and arrows. And we did several things kind of out on this ranch. We stayed out there. So we spent the night. And so we shared meals together. And then on the second day, we invited the spouses to come out and shared a meal together, kind of did like a campfire, s'mores type of event. And then we all went home. But I just think that there's something really valuable about spending time together, sharing meals together, and being in the office or in that professional environment can be ultra stuffy. And sometimes, leadership is very real, it's very human. And in order for us to be where we need to be, for trust to grow, we kind of need to get out of that environment. So as a police chief, I always found that if I needed to have a hard conversation, it was best, I would say, like, let's go take a drive. Let's get in the car together. Let's drive around town. So you don't have to worry about anybody listening, but we need to have a heart to heart. And I know that a lot of agencies do leadership type retreats, and some are good and some are bad. I've been involved in both. Sometimes I think if they're facilitated and you bring in somebody to do it, and if it's not done really well and organically, it may not have the intended effect. But outside of that, personally made an effort to go out to lunch with folks. If I knew that the patrol shifts were, meeting somewhere, I would go meet up with them every once in a while, eat in the briefing room. Um, and then outside of that, it's just showing up. If there was an officer involved shooting in the middle of the night, show up. If an officer got wrecked in a wreck or got hurt, you go to the hospital. I mean, you just can't underestimate the importance of just showing up. Not sending a delegate, not sending, somebody out there on your behalf, but just being there and hugging moms and hugging wives when something has happened to their husband or loved one. That's just, it's raw, it's authentic, and I think that people connect better to that than anything else.
Yeah, I think those are really great examples of you, again, bringing that human element back and it just having empathy depending on what the circumstances are and truly being a genuine human and expressing that. So I appreciate you sharing those examples. When we talk about like leadership behaviors and what roles leaders play in building trust, I think it's really important that we define the difference between transparency and confidentiality. We've mentioned transparency a few times in our discussion today, but employees can really get confused about transparency versus confidentiality. And they believe that when an organization or a leader says they're transparent, that they're entitled to know all the information about the topic, regardless of what that topic is, right? So to me, transparency is just sharing the why we're making decisions or changing processes, where confidentiality is protecting information like personnel issues or investigations or legal matters. And so I'm curious if you have any experience with that discrepancy, because it is a fine line, and if you have any examples of maybe where it kind of got blurred.
Yeah, I just know without trust, you run the risk of, when you're trying to walk that fine line, that it'll spark the conspiracy theories.
Mhm.
But if you are in the positive in your trust account, people will say, you know what? I don't know all the information, but I trust fill in the blank. And so I'm going to choose to believe that this is all well and good. Now, where you get into trouble is when you're new to your role and you have one of these issues come up very early and you haven't had the opportunity to build as much trust. You have to recognize that it's going to be tough, and maybe you look for ways to explore that. Um, I was unfortunate. I had a lot of really difficult situations early in my tenure as chief that allowed me to demonstrate to my team that they could trust me. Um, I think without those, some of the other things that I had to endure later on in my tenure as chief would have been incredibly difficult. Early on, we had a couple of critical incidents. We had a military jet that crashed in the middle of our city. We had COVID. All of these things happened like literally in my first year. Um, and through all of that, I think I had the opportunity to build some trust. Using the example of the officer involved shootings or the critical incidents, I knew that everything I typed in an email to my team, like as far as an update, was open records.
Mhm.
So um, we just made it a point to go visit every shift brief. I said, command staff, we are going to go, we're going to be there, and we're going to say, hey, there's some things we're not going to be able to talk about, and we're not going to write it all down, and we're not going to send a bunch of text messages around, but we're here in front of you at night because we want you to have the information. We want you to have it from us. We don't want you to be in the dark. And so what are your questions? Outside of that, of course, anytime an officer was hurt or there was, something that happened, I was always communicating with the team so that they're not getting their information from the news or through that rumor mill, but that they were hearing it from me. I just think, like anything, you have to be disciplined and consistent in your messaging so that they know that you are the source of truth and that they can trust that if there's something that can be shared, that they're going to get it from you.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
That's great. And you touched on so many things that happened within really the first part of your job as chief, COVID. And no one, like, literally there was no playbook for COVID. We have all these things that we prepare for, critical incidents, this, that, and the other. And if you went to your shelf as a police chief to look flipping through the book, you're like, all right, major international, like disease thing that happens, it's not in there, right? Nobody knew what we were going to do. And so you really had to endure that along with all the other challenges and things that just came up in part of critical incidents. So looking through all those types of things, you have that, you have political pressure, you have just the stress of the operation, you have shortages, you have politics, whether you want it there or not. How do you remain consistent? Like, how did you find success in being consistent and staying the course despite all the noise? Like, what was your secret? If you were to give advice to chiefs or people that want to be chiefs or leaders of any organization, what would that advice look like from you?
I think you have to be authentic to who you are. I came into the profession at 17 years old as a dispatcher. And I, at that point, had been shaped by my upbringing, my parents. And so I had a certain worldview. I had a certain way that I felt about people. And slowly over time, that began to get chiseled away because I saw kind of a stereotypical police officer, and that's what I wanted to be. And so I started changing who I was to become more like them, those guys that I saw, doing really good work. They were respected and admired, and that's what I wanted. So I started to kind of lose who I was to try to be them. And it was a really long journey to do that, only to come back to I can be authentic to myself and also be successful in this field. One of my favorite things to tell recruits is we need you just as you are. When you sat across those people in your hiring board, HR, the police leadership, you you were not a police officer. You didn't have anything to offer other than your genuine self. And they chose you for that. Why on earth, once you got a badge and a gun, would you try to become something other than that? They didn't choose that. They chose you the way you were on day one. Um, and so that would be my advice. I know, especially in the executive levels, and you both know this as well, that there's a persona, there's an idea of what we think we need to be for whatever role we're in. And that's just not the case. I just think we need more people being themselves. And yeah, no pretense, no alter ego or anything, just genuine to yourself is what I would say.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that as well. I think that again, when we're talking about internal trust, if we are being authentic, the trust comes more natural because employees can see right through it if we are not being authentic. It's also really hard to like maintain a facade, especially in like a high stress situation or during a lot of change. And so it's fascinating because even us as higher level leaders, we can point out who has a facade and who doesn't, right? So I appreciate that story as well. And just to kind of wrap up our conversation today and talk about takeaways, I really appreciate you giving us multiple examples of how being authentic and human helped you be a good leader and have a good organization, because I think people do lose sight of that because they believe there are expectations put on them. But, again, as a HR professional, I love the handwritten note example because you're really showing people that you do care. And so I think that if any of our listeners have any takeaways, if they can in their own way show that they care about their employees, that will get them very, very far.
You're right. In a way that is genuine and authentic to you, whatever that happens to be.
Yes, absolutely.
And as we kind of do wrap this whole thing up, one thing I just really want to touch on is, and then maybe it's for maybe another time, JT. You write me a note, handwritten note, to say thanks. I'll write you one back because my mom will
Sure.
require me to write you one back. But another time we can talk about a little bit more, and maybe another episode about really talking about how this all carries over to public trust, because that's just as important, and how we keep our employees feeling like they're supported, they're safe, and all those kinds of things. I wonder if you had a few quick moments just to talk about that before we kind of wrap this thing up today.
Yeah, and I would just give the example of Jessica, our boss. When she first met us, she said, "Hey," she did like an icebreaker and said, "What is your favorite road trip candy?"
Mm.
And it seemed just like a very and a really creative icebreaker. Like, it's great, and we all laughed and joked. And then the next time we got together, what did Jess do? She had bought all of that and handle it each person. I know that when you travel, you like this thing. I thought of you. I went to not only I listened to you,
Mhm.
I made a note. I was intentional about remembering the thing that you shared with me. Then I went and got it. And then I brought it and I gave it to you. That is, to me, one of the most perfect, beautiful examples of a servant's heart, a true leader. I'm trying to connect with you. I'm trying to build trust. It all begins there. Just those little bitty, authentic things.
Nicole, what was yours?
So I missed that conversation, but she gave me the nerd clusters, which I love junk food, so it worked out.
Yeah, those are amazing.
I couldn't be really disappointed, but she did
Yeah.
great.
JT, what was yours?
I love the honey barbecue spiral
Mhm.
Fritos.
Oh
Okay.
wow.
Only for road trips. I do not
Okay.
eat them any other time.
Okay. I'm a hot tamales guy, but in
Oh, nice.
hindsight, had I known, I should have said lobster is my favorite. Fresh made lobster is my favorite, and I love it shipped to my house. But
Yeah.
who knew then, right?
Right,
Nicole,
right.
let's go in and send Doug a live
I love
lobster.
it. Yeah,
This is all working according to plan
I
today. I
love
love
it.
it. I love it. Well, JT, thank you so much for your time. We've gotten to know you so well as you've joined us here at NeoGov, and it's a pleasure really working alongside you. And those of you who don't know JT, get to know the guy because he's as authentic as they come and one of the best in the business. So again,
Yeah.
JT, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, guys. It's an honor to be with you.
And thanks everybody for joining Public Voices, and thanks to our sponsor, NeoGov, which is the leading HR software provider for the public sector, for supporting these types of conversations. And be sure, don't forget, this is important, be sure to follow and stream wherever you happen to listen to your podcasts, and don't forget to rate us. Unless it's really bad, then don't. So
And we hope that today's discussion is giving you some things to consider and take back to your team. And so, if there's any topic that you would like to hear us talk about, please let us know. So, until next time, we'll keep the conversation going. Same time next week. See you soon.
thanks, everybody.
Bye.